Hello friends, welcome back. I'm Tori and this is Beginner's Mind, a channel for students of neurodiagnostic technology. In this episode, we will talk about why the 1020 system was invented, and then we will look at a two-dimensional representation of the head so that we can get a little bit more familiar with the nomenclature for electrode placements. In the next episode, I will introduce you to my girl Sam, and we will look at measuring and marking the head in 3 dimensions. Let's dig in. Standardized electrode placement is essential for creating a rigorous methodology across labs and between different tests for the same patient. Although brainwaves may look a little bit chaotic if you're not used to reading EEGs, there is a method to the madness. There's a predictable pattern to different kinds of brainwaves in different areas of the brain. So imagine if a patient came in and we just stuck electrodes anywhere on the head, and then they had to come back a week later for another test. We wouldn't really be able to compare the 2 studies because there would just be too much variability. Now imagine that all of the electrodes were put in the same place every time for certain tests at one lab, and then at another lab in another facility, they put electrodes in different places. These 2 labs wouldn't be able to share data if they didn't have their electrodes all in the same spot. Once again, there would just be too much variability to compare the tests to each other. The scientific method relies on results that are reproducible. To reduce variables and reproduce tests successfully, we have to maintain consistency between labs and between patient visits. In order to address this variability, we have the International 1020 system. It was given this name because it represents 10% and 20% increments of the total size of the head. This way, no matter how small or how large someone's head is, the interelectrode distance will be perfectly balanced across the head. The interelectrode distance is the distance between 2 electrodes. It is essential that these interelectrode distance are balanced and symmetrical because, as we will see in our video on differential amplification, the closer 2 electrodes are to each other, the smaller the amplitude of our signal will be. The only times it's appropriate for our electrodes to be misplaced from this 1020 system is when it's impossible to do so, such as when a patient is bandaged and we can't take the bandages off, or if a piece of the skull is missing. Even then, if we move one electrode, it is important that we keep the paired electrode on the opposite side of the head symmetrical by moving that one as well. In the next video, we will cover measuring and marking all of these points in 3 dimensions, but for today, let's just start by looking at this 2-dimensional representation. Look at this graphic of the lobes of the brain: frontal, parietal, temporal, occipital. Here we have the central sulcus. Now look at this graphic of the 1020 system. This represents the clinical 21 electrode 1020 system. Nomenclature is a system of names and terms in a particular field of science. The nomenclature, or the way that we've named these spots on the 1020 system, gives us some clues as to where they are on the head. The F's are over the frontal lobe, the T's over the temporal lobe, the O's over the occipital lobe, and so forth. C represents the central sulcus, and FP stands for frontopolar, because they are over the frontal poles of the frontal lobe just over the eyes. A is for auricular, which means having to do with the auricle. The auricle is the visual portion of the external ear, also known as the pinna. Next, we can see there are either numbers or the letter Z after the letter that was assigned for the lobe. Z represents midline, the imaginary line running down the superior view of the brain that divides the 2 hemispheres. The numbers are assigned from left to right, starting at midline and moving out laterally. The left hemisphere only has odd numbers, and the right hemisphere only even. This way you know that when somebody is talking about an odd number electrode, it is definitely on the left side of the head, and when they're referring to an even, it is definitely on the right side of the head. A quick side note, you may be wondering when you look at this diagram, what happened to F1 and F2? Why did we skip straight to F3 and F4 without naming F1 and F2? Well, remember how I said this graphic represents the clinical 21 electrode 1020 system? There's another system that divides the head into even smaller increments, like so. You won't be using these for a routine EEG, so we're not going to go over this today. I believe this is mostly used for research, but just erase it from your mind for now because we're not going to be talking about that today. We're just going to be looking at this much more simple version. So now this doesn't look so bad, does it? This is something you're going to want to memorize immediately. The sooner you get this down, the easier your life will be. Your teachers are going to ask you questions about C3 and T4, and you just want to be able to know immediately what they're talking about and not have to sit there and think about it or bust out a diagram in order to understand or be able to answer the question. My suggestion is to just draw this diagram over and over and over and over again, because eventually someone will probably give you a blank version of this and ask you to draw it yourself. One more thing that I have to tell you, and I am so sorry to be the one to explain this. There are actually two ways of naming some of these electrodes. These little boxes that I've put here, these represent 4 electrodes that have 2 different names. We're not going to get into why, but the old system is still used by some machines, some old textbooks, some texts that got used to using those terms will use those with you. So you really do need to know both of the terminologies. You can't just memorize one, because if somebody brings up the other one that you don't know about, you're going to be SOL. The way that I did it is I just memorized one set completely, and then once I had that down really solid, then I went back and memorized these other 4 that were just a little bit different. In the description below, I have included a blank PDF that you can print out or just download to your phone and mark up so that you can start memorizing exactly where all these electrodes are. In my next video, we will go over how to find the anatomical landmarks, and we will actually begin measuring and marking the head. Until next time, friends, I'm Tori, and this is Beginner's Mind. Wishing you all the luck with this 1020 system and reminding you to keep asking questions.